As the Israeli military continues to expand its ground operations in Gaza, the Israeli defense minister ordering troops to capture additional territory, warning also that that newly seized territory could be permanently occupied by Israel. This is the second day in a row now that Israel Katz, the country's defense minister, has also threatened civilians in Gaza. On one day, he suggested that Gaza would be totally obliterated if civilians there don't rise up against Hamas and force the release of Israeli hostages being held in Gaza. And on another day, the defense minister also suggesting that Israel will apply military and civilian pressure, including the forced displacement of Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. And this just provides more evidence for accusations that Israel has been using collective punishment, which is a violation of international law, as it wages its military campaign in Gaza. Also, this happened. The Israeli military blowing up the Turkish hospital in Gaza, claiming that Hamas was using it as a base of operations in the Gaza Strip. This is not the first time that we have seen the Israeli military, of course, deliberately destroying civilian infrastructure, often claiming that it was being used by Hamas. Now, meanwhile, as all of that is happening in Gaza, we are watching as Israeli society is really beginning to tear at the seams as this war drags on and as the Israeli prime minister takes one controversial step after the next. Overnight, the Israeli cabinet voting unanimously to fire the head of the Shin Bet, Israel's domestic intelligence service, the first time in the country's history that that step has ever been taken. Many of Netanyahu's critics saying he didn't have the authority to do this, and the country's attorney general saying that the processes were not properly followed to do so. The Israeli Supreme Court issuing a temporary injunction against the firing of the Shin Bet director until a hearing can be held on the matter. But beyond questions about Netanyahu's authority, his critics are also accusing him of suspicious motives, as the Shin Bet had recently begun investigating advisors to Netanyahu over improper foreign lobbying on behalf of the Qatari government. Allegations that Netanyahu and his circle have, of course, denied. But all of this is provoking more disunity in Israel at a time when many here believe that unity is indeed what is needed. It's even raised questions about a potential civil war from many across the Israeli political spectrum. The Israeli prime minister on Friday insisting that a civil war is not in the offing.
Outrage in Israel as tens of thousands have taken to the streets. The rage stems from the resumption of the war in Gaza and Prime Minister Netanyahu's dismissal of Ronen Bar, the head of the country's internal security service, Shin Bet. Today, Netanyahu's cabinet also approved a no-confidence motion against the normally independent Attorney General, paving the way for her dismissal. To help us understand it all, Israeli journalist Ari Shavit joins me from Tel Aviv. Ari, let's start with the resumption of the war. I understand, both sides are claiming that there was a breach. Hamas says it's now being asked to do things that were not agreed to in the original agreement. Israel says Hamas has not abided by the agreement. But there does seem to be a wonder why this resumption, why a kind of massive campaign now against Gaza. And there's some suspicion as to why Bibi Netanyahu is doing it. What is your thought?
Well, there is reason for the suspicion because people are very suspicious of Mr. Netanyahu, many people in Israel. But I think if you ask Israelis, the vast majority of Israelis want the hostages back, but they want Hamas crushed. And in a sense, with all the achievements Israel had in this dreadful war, that was not achieved. We did not do what America's allies did in Mosul. Hamas is still there. So I think there is a feeling in the country that a war against Hamas is justified. Whether it should have been launched right now, that's a question mark. But if I can connect it to the issues, the fascinating discussions you just had, Israel is right now sinking into a constitutional crisis that is like everything that you were discussed about, the fears in America, is already happening here. So the two issues, the Gaza issue and the inner constitutional issue and identity struggle within Israel, are now merging in a very troubling way.
So I've heard people talk about the nature of this divide in Israel as almost a civil war, Israel being on the brink of civil war. Give us a sense of what is the key issue, what is the great divide in Israel right now?
So, again, I think that it's a kind of conceptual civil war. I hope it won't get worse. Again, I'll connect it to America and to the conversation you just had. Israel is very similar to America in some ways and very different. The difference we have is that we have no constitution, we have no tradition, and we are at war. And this is what makes the Israeli crisis worse than the one you are experiencing in America. If I want to try to be fair to both sides, to describe it, I would say that the Israeli liberals are terrified of an Aradwan scenario. They are terrified that Mr. Netanyahu and others will take over the country, will dismantle the judiciary, will take over the communications, and you will have a not only an illiberal democracy, but something even worse. Because as we say, we don't have a constitution to defend us. On the other hand, the populists or the right are afraid that Israel is experiencing a kind of old Turkey model, where the judges and the generals are overruling the wish of the people. So the deeper debate in Israel is between its Jewish identity in the nationalist religious dimension and the democratic identity. By the way, the secret of Israel is the balance between the two, but that's the crisis. But the real discussion at the moment, which is relevant to America, to Europe, to everywhere, is what is democracy? Because on the one hand, the right is taking it, they are saying, we have the majority and we cannot rule because the judiciary, the military, the police, the Secret Service don't let us rule. On the other hand, you have the liberals who are saying, in a moment, we may lose all checks and balances. The defense of human rights, of the rule of law will be in jeopardy. So it's a profound, profound crisis. If it wasn't so tragic, it would have been fascinating. But we are sinking into Israel's worst constitutional crisis. So if in America, it's a question mark, in Israel, it's an emerging reality this week. It's a very dramatic week.
Haaretz says that Bibi Netanyahu is prolonging the war, has restarted this war because of precisely what you say, to shut down the protests on the left, to shut down the dissent, and allow him to rule and to survive.
So listen, the question, let's put it, bluntly. There is the Benjamin Netanyahu enigma. The old Benjamin Netanyahu was a conservative Republican American. The new Netanyahu that emerged in recent years is more like a French monarch of l'état moi, the state is me. The transition is very interesting. It has to do with American politics. I think what changed Netanyahu in many ways in the last few years is, one, a sense of power. He's been too many years or many years in power, but also there is a kind of element of Trump envy. He basically says, why can't I do here what Trump is doing in America? As I said, there are some good reasons why he can't do here what Trump can do, because it's a different system. But I think that this enigma of why is Netanyahu acting in such an aggressive way is quite a question. And I think that his recent visit to America brought him back as a kind of much more aggressive and taking very radical action. Although, as I said, the people on the Israeli right have some legitimate grievances. I mean, the issue of how we really need in Israel to find harmony again, to rebuild our democracy in a way that balances the rule of law with the rule of the majority. And it's while in the rest of the world, it's a general question, in Israel, it's very acute right now. And I hope that if we overcome this crisis, we can actually let the silent, positive Israeli majority kind of rebuild the Israeli democracy and a kind of new Israeli republic, because we cannot afford, in the middle of an existential war, to have such a horrible constitutional crisis that goes with a completely kind of crisis of government in a split society.
Ari Shafit, pleasure to have you on, sir.